Maybe 17 or 18.
Politics are cold, saying all the same thing. It's a way to doll up all the hate that we scream. And they'll tell you what you want to hear for a vote. But when you hold them to it, well, the answer is no. We'll fight for the land that we swore to uphold, but not for the people who share the same soul. And the land still divided could never be strong. If we believe the same thing, then we'll all get along. My countrymen see to see, my countrymen torn at the seams. We're alone, we're alone, we're alone. We think we're free.
The man you just saw from the previous clip has a unique story to tell. His first encounter with Vietnam started when he served as the crew chief on a UH-1 helicopter in the war in Vietnam and later participated in the anti-war movement as a POW or prisoner of war. Vietnam holds a special place in his heart ever since. And today, we had the honor to sit down and talk to him to understand more about what made Bob Chenoweth a great friend of Vietnam. Hello, Bob, and welcome to Talk Vietnam.
Thank you.
50 years has passed since the war ended. Can you share with us a little bit about your knowledge about Vietnam before your first encounter with it?
I didn't have what I would say a political understanding of the reality of the war in Vietnam.
And what did you see in Saigon? How life was for people?
It was confusing to me because I saw many contradictions. And especially the biggest one for me was the way the American soldiers regarded the people of Vietnam. You saw people mistreated or abused. I think the reality is we weren't supposed to think. We were just supposed to do our job and, take care of ourselves.
And then what happened when your helicopter was shot down?
On the night of the 31st of January, the Tet Offensive began, and everyone was in their battle clothing. They had their weapons and helmets and everything. As we crossed Highway 1, and we're maybe 5 or 6 kilometers from the coast, the helicopter exploded from the ground fire. Guerrillas they shot our helicopter to pieces, and we crashed in a cemetery. We were taken into the village that was nearby, and we stayed there until the evening. But as the evening came, we began to travel.
Lord, I know how this was meant to go. When I unto it I am never.
I went to Vietnam in 1967 in January as a helicopter crew chief. and I was stationed at Tan Son Nhut Army Heliport.
How did all your loving run away from me? Where are we now?
When I was a prisoner after we were captured, we traveled up in the mountains. We walked on foot. Each evening we would stop someplace like
Where
this.
are we now?
This sketch that I made is from the time where we first walked up onto the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and the landscape was denuded because of the Agent Orange. We sat in it.
Oh, you told me you knew how this went.
Just when we saw the soldiers, they were carrying supplies. Each man had a very large pack on his back. People don't do that because they're forced to do it. People do that because they understand the responsibility they have. Every day we would walk during the day and rest at a base camp at night. So we began to experience just the depth of the organization that the Viet Cong or the resistance movement had. How the guerrilla fighters lived, what they ate, the equipment they had, the supplies they carried, the dedication of these soldiers walking up and down the mountains. It was startling and overwhelming. Here we were with the enemy. We had not seen the enemy before. By that time, we already realized that we were subject to the same conditions as the village people that we were with.
May I say it was an eye-opening experience when you
Yes.
set your boots on the ground and really saw how the Vietnamese soldiers lived their life and
Right.
marched along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. So tell us more about your time in prisons in Nghệ An.
So after that trip on trucks up into North Vietnam, we came to the province of Nghệ An. So at first we were in a building that had round windows in the back. Each prisoner had an individual room, just big enough for sitting or laying down, and just barely tall enough to stand up. But we had the window. We called it portholes. So we had the window to be able to see out. But during the day, we went out and we did some work. Initially, we were repairing bomb shelters in the village, because if a rainstorm came, maybe they would have tree trunks across the ditch and then earth on top of that. And if it collapsed, then we would go and help repair it.
Do you think, isn't it interesting that just a few months or days ago, you were someone flying in the sky, dropping bomb?
If the bombers came, we wanted to be in the bomb shelter too. So we went through an entire cycle of planting and harvesting rice. You know, we were helping produce food for ourselves.
What did you grow?
We grew watermelon and squash and manioc. Once we came into the city, finally, we longed for the countryside because it was more peaceful. Oftentimes when we were out working, the women would come by, maybe they'd harvested pineapples or something. So they would give us one or give us some peanuts or whatever crop they were getting that day. So
The total length of you walking along the Ho Chi Minh Trail, how long did it take you to get to the north, to Hanoi?
well, we were captured on the 8th of February, and we probably got up to Nghệ An in the middle of April. Most of that time we were on the road.
Right,
So
yeah. Long enough to understand.
long enough on the road. But you also, you got that sense of what it was like for people coming the other way, because we saw people coming the other way nearly every day.
So from that very unique experience along the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and then you found yourself in Hanoi's prisons. Tell us more about the life in...
Well, before Hanoi, we lived in Hatay province. So when we came, we recognized right away that that camp was new. The buildings were new. But we didn't know why.
Just think about that time. Vietnam were facing many difficulties.
Yes.
And somehow they still managed to build a prison.
Yes.
Yeah. What do you think about that?
By that time, we already realized that we were subject to the same conditions as the village people that we were with and the soldiers we had seen. We saw what they ate. We ate the same thing they ate. Sometimes the interpreter would explain to us that they tried to give us a little more food because they realized we were bigger and, maybe need to eat a little bit more. Americans are used to eating a little bit more. And then there was the Santé commando raid, they call it. It was an attack on what they believed was a prison camp, but the camp had long been empty. But we heard the night of the attack, we were very close to that area that was attacked. And we heard the helicopters, we heard some gunfire, and we knew something was up, but we didn't know what. The next day, all of our guards came into the camp with their full battle equipment, and they began to build slip trenches, fighting trenches, right inside the camp. So they were being prepared for maybe the same thing would happen to our camp. And we stayed one more day in that camp, and then the next evening, our head interpreter came in and said, "Pack your things." We began the trip to Hanoi. We were taken to a camp that the prisoners called the plantation garden or the plantation. And they called it that because it was an old French military camp that housed a mobile battalion. They had half-tracks and trucks and vehicles. But in the center of that camp was a large two-story building that looked like a plantation house. And so that's how it got the nickname, the plantation. Now that place was 17 Le Nam Day Street in Hanoi.
So describe to us a day in prison in Hanoi.
Usually the first big event was they would come around in the morning with breakfast. We'd have a big pot. There was our water. Often in the morning it was tea. So we would...
And how did the guard talk to you, in English or in Vietnamese?
Well,
what did they say?
We had interpreters. The interpreters, we called them turnkeys. They were the ones that would come and open the doors. They would come in the morning and, we would get our food, and after breakfast usually one or two of us would be delegated we took turns washing the dishes. And so we had a wash area and a shower area over in one end of the camp. We'd take our things over there and wash. If we were working on some project during the day, we would do that work and wait for lunch. It was kind of breakfast, lunch, dinner. We played cards. If we had things to read, we would read. Oftentimes we would get books. There were times, when books came unsolicited, maybe some delegation from the United States, the anti-war delegation, would bring books over. So most of the things that we were given access to were books that had something to do with the war.
Do you remember what books you enjoyed reading the most?
The first books that we got was Vietnam Today, but that was even when we were in the camp in the forest, in the jungle. That was a good background book on just what Vietnam was like. It was a description of Vietnam, and made by Hunak. We read a lot of other books, produced in Vietnam that were published in English. So they had a foreign languages publishing house. My favorite books were the historical series about Vietnam, from the ancient times, Bronze Age, all the way up through the different dynasties, fighting the Ming, and I became fascinated and deeply interested in the early history of Vietnam, and realizing in Hanoi we were in a city that was 1,000 years old, and on every subject. I mean, they had books on agriculture. What was Vietnam doing to increase rice production, and how family farms were being incorporated and all this kind of thing. So there was just a lot of good knowledge, general knowledge about Vietnam itself.
So that time, in a way, helped you understand more about Vietnam, the country you maybe barely knew about before you came, right?
And after a while, when you begin to appreciate the depth of the struggle that Vietnamese people have had to do for hundreds of years. You had different countries from time to time that would invade Vietnam, and just the effort that people had to make to ensure their own identity, their own independence, that makes a strong impression on you. You realize these are fiercely independent people who want to preserve who they are.
And at that time, did you question, so what were you doing here?
Of course. Yeah, and that was the big question for everyone, for all the prisoners, but also people back home, people in the United States. What were we doing there? We were wrapped up in a political ideology, the ideology of the Cold War.
Tôi là Đại tá Lưu Văn Hợp, là sĩ quan quản giáo ở trại giam phi công Mỹ bị bắt trong chiến tranh tháng 12 năm 1970 cho đến năm 1973. Tiêu chuẩn hàng ngày ăn bữa sáng là gồm có bánh mì, 1 đến 2 chiếc bánh mì, 1 ca sữa hoặc là cà phê, 1 điếu thuốc lá.
Soup always varied depending on what vegetables were around. But a lot of pumpkin soup. We ate a lot of pumpkin soup.
Ngày Noel 25 tháng 12 thì chúng tôi cũng đảm bảo là phi công Mỹ được tự do là nấu nướng, thưởng thức những món ăn truyền thống của người Mỹ. Và phi công Mỹ tự làm, cũng mua những cái trang trí như là cây thông Noel, rồi đèn Noel.
We get a chance to see the cathedral. We've seen it at Christmas time, and get a chance to see the people coming to the church.
What about mental and physical health care treatment that you have in prison?
I had a bad toothache, and so I was taken to Bach Mai Hospital. The dentist was a woman, and she said that since you're here now, let's take one, and then when it heals, and maybe we can get a better X-ray of the other, we can take the others.
So that meant that when you have health issue, for example, you received treatment.
It was very difficult for them because the material that was available was very limited, but they tried very hard to keep people in good health, and that was not just the diet, but once in a while we'd get a bottle of beer. Everybody in the room would have a bottle of beer to share, to drink. Late 1971, early 1972, the camp authorities started allowing us to go on visits. We would dress into civilian clothes. The first place that I remember going to was the National Museum. And that for me I was at home. Because I had been reading all about Vietnamese history and the resistance, against foreign invaders and everything. I have to say I was thrilled to see naklu drum. At the Temple of Literature, the thing that impressed me about that was it's one of the oldest universities in the world. It just gave you an appreciation for the depth of Vietnamese history and culture, and even despite all the difficulties Vietnam was experiencing throughout its history, they were able to keep that continuity. We had pigs in our camp, and that was one of the jobs every day, was to take all the scraps. But somehow, that pig knew that his time was up. This pig ran back and forth through the camp 3 or 4 times, squealing the whole time. Finally, one of the interpreters got him. The holidays were good because that first Lunar New Year in 1968, at the end of 68, early 69, that was the first time we got bánh chưng. And man, everybody just said, holy mackerel, why can't we have this every day? And the interpreter said, because not every day is Tet. He said, this is the traditional food for Lunar New Year. We all participated in the process of making it, so we learned how to make it. And that stayed in the memory banks, because I make bánh chưng every New Year.
500 tù binh, nhiều người tốt nhưng số người rất phản ứng. Họ thành lập một cái ban lãnh đạo chuyên môn theo dõi động tác của người lính gác, quản giáo, người chuyên theo dõi về thái độ của người trại trưởng, cấp cao hơn chỉ huy cấp dưới, người bắt trước chỉ huy người bị bắt sau.
Conservative career pilots come up with a sort of single narrative. These were American victims of the war who survived a horrible ordeal and should be treated as heroes.
And he said, I was forced to eat rice and fish heads. That's how bad it was, he said. So, you know, nobody was forced to eat ever. The conditions were difficult, but they were difficult for everybody. They'd been bombed for 10 years.
It seems to me that a slow transition happened here in your thoughts, because obviously you had a very big interest in learning about Vietnam, not just the war, but also about the history and culture and people. So was that the reason why it kind of shifted or changed your viewpoint about the war?
I felt the responsibility to join with other people around the world who were protesting the American war. So, but thinking about that for a long period of time before making a decision.
How long did it take you?
You know, when I first said I would like to write a letter, you know, maybe to my senator or to the peace movement, explaining who I was and the things I was learning, and that I was also opposed to the war as a prisoner. The Vietnamese authorities, they were very reluctant. They said, well, no, they asked, well, maybe people will think you're brainwashed. And I said, well, they can think that if they want, but, you know, if they hear what I have to say, they also will know that many other people around the world are saying the same thing. So are they all brainwashed? Are the GIs coming back from Vietnam and saying the war is wrong and talking about the things they did, the atrocities and things they participated in? Were they brainwashed?
But you were caught in such a unique situation, you know, being a prisoner.
Yes.
And,
yes.
you know, anti-war movement.
And we understood that. And I think the camp authorities understood that too. We even joined with prisoners in other rooms. Someone would prepare a letter or statement, and then they would take it, and any of the prisoners who wanted to sign on to that letter. So then when it would be broadcast over the radio or sent
Were there many
created.
names?
Some of the letters had quite a few prisoners, officers and enlisted from the South. But many of those people discounted, when they returned home, they discounted that there was no force to do that. It was the depth of understanding that I had is what compelled me to and made me continue to know that that activity was right.
But when you did that, I think you also knew the consequences.
Oh, yes.
When you would face when you returned home.
I was prepared to face that, whatever it was, when I went home, and so were the other guys.
But why? The cost is so high and the pressure was there.
I don't know, it's what you believe. You know, that's all I could go by, was what I believed and what I saw. I couldn't go home and tell people I was forced to make statements against the war or that I was badly treated. Other people did. But that was their decision. I was worried. I didn't want to go to jail again. Once I left Vietnam, that was enough. That was enough.
You are talking about other guys, and I believe they belong to the Peace Committee. So tell us more about your involvement with the Peace Committee and the guys there.
There were a group of us, about 10 or 12, that all pretty much felt the same way about the war and were willing to try to do what we could. And at some point we came up with the idea that we would just create a little logo, and it would have, you know, American prisoners in Vietnam against the war, and it had the peace symbol in the middle, and we became the Peace Committee as a result of that. The officers were opposed to our action, and on one occasion yelled to us across the camp for us to stop our activity. I remember Al Riyadi said, "I'll protest the war till the day I die."
My name is Alfonso Ray Riati. I'm going to sing a song. Anh đi trăng đêm nay có nước Mỹ đông rực sôi, ôi từng chết chung.
The reported activities of the 8 have angered many senior military officials in the Pentagon. The 8 men were troublemakers. They were seen fraternizing with guards, giving away vital camp secrets. Military sources said that they expected court-martial charges to be filed against the men as soon as the remaining prisoners were freed from Hanoi.
You know, it's a sad story because of the charges that you faced and also other guys faced. So tell me more about the charges.
The charges were filed in the military, according to military law. Any person in the military can bring a charge against anyone else if they have a valid reason. U.S. government itself did not file charges against us. It was other prisoners. Nothing that in the legal world would constitute as proof.
How did you feel when you knew that you were charged?
I was not surprised, but I sat down and talked with my father, and my father told me, he said, "You're not going to jail again." He said, "I'll drive you to Canada myself."
At that time, did you think for just one moment that, oh, what I was doing may cause harm to my father and maybe he would have to worry too much?
Of course. But
why were you emotional when you talked about your father?
it's my dad. I know it was hard. It was very hard for him. And When I was a prisoner, I knew that I was okay. But I also knew that my family did not know. The Army was always trying to instill doubt in my family and in other families about where the prisoners were they okay. The military, and especially the Nixon administration, used the American prisoner families to try to build support for the war. Because from about 1971 on, Nixon would always say, well, we have to continue because we have to make sure we get our prisoners back. Do you believe that Nixon cared about the prisoners? No, he cared about perpetuating the policy. So during that time, my stepmother, who was married to my dad, one time we talked, and she told me how hard it was for him. You don't realize those things until you become a parent yourself. And once you're a parent, you understand.
I don't know what to say. And
what can you say? What can you say?
So I think it's important to have your story be shared with more people, and so they have a better understanding of what you have been through.
One of our group, he committed suicide in June of 1973, and Peace Committee people came to the funeral, and we were the honor guard for the funeral.
War had committed suicide, criticized the military service for its handling of the case. The Marine sergeant, 24 years old, died June 27th from a .25 caliber gunshot wound to the head. After his suicide on June 27, 1973, his wife said the Pentagon had murdered her husband. The North Vietnamese kept him alive for 5 years, she said. Then he came back to America, and his own people killed him.
I know it was hard. It was very hard for him. And
when you learned about his death, did you ever think about your own situation?
Larry had come to Portland to visit with his wife and little girl, and his wife was pregnant. I got to know his family a little bit, and shortly after that, I learned of his death. And so when the funeral was organized, my father and I went, and the same day of the funeral, when we came back to the hotel, I got a call from my military lawyer who was at the Presidio of San Francisco. I met with my military lawyer. He said the charges are going to be dismissed. The Army was not going to allow me to remain in the Army. That was one of the conditions.
When you decided to make anti-war statements, you already foresaw that it would make it very difficult for you to stay in the Army.
Yes.
And you accepted that consequence. How was that experience back home?
In July of 1973, right after I got out of the Army, I received a letter from the Indochina Peace Campaign, which was an activity of Tom Hayden and Jane Fonda and then other activists. Even though the peace agreements had been signed, the prisoners had come home, the war was still going on. And the reason the war was still going on was because the Congress was still funding the Saigon government. Our goal at that point was to end that aid, to cut that aid, to try to get the fighting to stop.
So it was only several months after your release, right? Immediately you participated in the anti-war movement.
Yes.
So it was...
I couldn't help it. So in September of 1973, we began the tour. We traveled to about 30 cities in 3 months. And most of the events that we did were you know, university campus, big events, thousands of people coming. Tom Hayden would talk about his analysis of the war. The thing for me was it introduced me to the anti-war movement. I met people from all over the United States that had protested the war. It gave me the strength, you know, knowing there were millions of people becoming opposed to the war, protesting the war. And that effort was critical, you know, because without the public support, it became very, very hard. Yeah. And leading that effort were the veterans.
Yeah. And somewhere in Vietnam, a prisoner was doing kind of the same thing.
Trying to join in. Yeah.
If you can speak on behalf of the peace committee, of the men who died and the men who maybe don't have the opportunities to share with our Vietnamese audience and international audience, what would you say about Vietnam?
The thing about the Peace Committee, what a lot of people have pointed out about the Peace Committee was the diversity. In a way, it was a microcosm of what was going on in the United States because it was the same kind of diversity that came together.
And why are you crying, Bob?
Because we shared that time. I didn't share it with just anybody. I shared it with those guys. And I'm sad that they're gone. The guys that are still around, I wish them well. I hope they're doing well. But the guys that are departed, you know, in a way, their lives were cut short in part because of their experience in Vietnam. You know, it's a feeling that anybody would have when they lose somebody that's close to them or someone that they shared a particular experience. And whenever I've been back to Vietnam and gone to some of the places that we went together, I think about that. That's why I'm crying.
You don't have any regret, and
No.
Because you know that you lived a meaningful life.
Yeah, but also I know I did the right thing.
I read an article on Washington Post, and it quoted you saying that people usually celebrate the day they were released. But you celebrate the day you were captured.
Yes, February 8th, 1968. Yeah.
Why did you say that?
Because it was the beginning of a whole new life for me, a whole new way of looking at the world, understanding the world.
Now looking back, you know, it was a long journey, and what did you get out of it?
When you're brought up in any country, probably you have a perspective based on your reality, based on what your family tells you, what you experience, what your friends understand. Being able to move from that to a more eye-opening perspective, I began to see the world more for what it was than what people want you to think it is.
Your relationship with Vietnam is still going on very well.
I celebrate the Lunar New Year. I always make bánh trưng every year, and I make spring rolls. I brought all my the clothing and the bag and the accoutrements and everything that I had as a prisoner when I left. I brought that back a couple of years ago to the Hoa Lo Museum.
When Vietnamese audience watch our program, what message do you want to send to them?
Learn your own history. Talk to the people that are still around that experienced it. Read about your own history. As a citizen of any country, you have responsibilities yourself.
How should we conclude our discussion today? Because it is a story of a POW, it is a story of anti-war movement, it is a story of peace.
If you can, and I know it's not possible for a lot of people, but if you can travel and experience what life is like for other people, and it doesn't really matter where you go, because I think you're going to have the same benefit from it no matter where you go. I think that's probably one of the best things that people can do. The other thing is to read, inform yourself.
I think it's been a wonderful journey, and it's somehow a full circle. And we are so lucky to sit here and talk about your story, but in a very different context now, when Vietnam and the US, moving from enemy to become partners. Yeah. So I hope that with your sharing, somehow more understanding will be shared between the two countries.
I hope so.
About the history.
I hope so.
About the truth. And with that, it would help close the wounds of war.
Yes. I hope so.
Thank you so much, Bob.
You're welcome.
It's such an honor.
You cannot stop the clouds from floating. You cannot stop the river from flowing to the sea. And you cannot stop the people from wanting to be free.
And for Bob Chenoweth, nothing can stop him from speaking from his conscience, which explains his viewpoint and anti-war activism. I'm deeply touched by his story, and I hope you also feel the same. A whole life dedicated to peace, Bob has inspired many people. Let his story be shared, and let peace shine. That's it for Talk Vietnam. Thank you very much for watching, and see you again next time.
And you cannot stop the river from rushing to the sea. And you cannot stop the people fighting to be free. It is sometimes sad, the water back uphill, and backwater can sometimes seem so very, very still. But we all know that water never really stops at all. It has no choice, it has to fall. And you cannot stop the cloud from falling, and you cannot stop the rain from falling, and you cannot stop the river from rushing to the sea, and you cannot stop the people fighting to be free.